Peace, and welcome. I'm super excited to get this conversation going. This young man has been all over the place, interviewing all types of people, from folks that we admire for all of their financial achievements to people that are speaking truth to power, and he's doing it with swag along the way. He goes by Anthony Pompliano. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. I'm super excited to do this. I listen, if I got swag, then I'm doing something right. So let's go.
Yeah, I saw some of the highlights on your YouTube channel on doing the CNBC thing and like giving it back to people. And I was like, oh, he got some, and the whole bang bang thing. I was like, this dude loves hip hop. He has to be like a hip hop head.
First time I ever skipped school was in high school. I think I was a freshman or sophomore, and Lil Wayne's Carter 2 came out. We just sat in the parking lot and listened to it over and over again for like 6 hours. But it's the CNBC stuff's funny because I grew up in a family with I got 4 younger brothers. So it was basically just like we just, talk junk to each other every single day, all day long for 2 decades. Right. And when you get on CNBC, that they're not used to that stuff, right? They're used to they say something, everyone's quiet. I'm like, hey man, listen, I'm gonna treat you like I treat my brothers.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's interesting because you're also visibly you look like one of the younger panelists, and so to hold your own and like to be on that traditional financial network talking about Bitcoin, banging for Bitcoin. I'm like, okay, he out here, he got conviction. He believes. He's a believer. And you're showcasing it. So
I tell him every time I go on, I say, look, we're either going to be really, really right or really, really wrong. And I'm cool with either one of those two outcomes. And if you look at it that way and you kind of understand, the potential outcome of either really right or really wrong, then either thing's okay. It's just, I think a lot of people kind of look at it as more of like a trade. Right. They're like, oh, he's going to go up 20%. And when you get into that game, it's a little bit different. When you look at it more as like a venture type opportunity where the market opportunity is so big, but the probability of it actually occurring is very small. It kind of re-centers you on the right expectations.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into a little bit about your story. I think I first saw one of your interviews. I don't have cable or a TV, right? So I wouldn't have seen you on CNBC.
Me neither. So we're good.
But I saw the interview with Chamath, and then I was like, oh, okay. I always, want to catch him when he talks. But then I saw you had my homie Ruben Harris on, and I've known him for a minute. Where'd you grow up?
So I was born right outside of Miami in Hollywood, Florida, and then around 10 years old or so moved to North Carolina and then grew up there.
Okay. Yeah, and you sort of like you've created this platform where you're an authority on things that are happening related to like financial policy, investment, and it's really impressive, right? Because there's so many people talking about money, and you have, like made a lane for yourself. When did you sort of first get into this whole focus on what it means to really have a command and understand finances?
Yeah, to be honest, there was no master plan, right? I mean, in college, I got a economics degree, so I've kind of always been interested in it, but also studied sociology and kind of legal studies and what I would consider the more qualitative parts of society. And then out of school, started 2 companies. I was fortunate enough to sell both of those. And then went and worked at Facebook and Snapchat. And so kind of went, more tech and Silicon Valley type jobs, but was always interested in finance. And so I think that when I talk about it now, I just don't look at it as pure numbers in the way that I think a Wall Street kind of analyst would. I've had the fortunate ability to live life and kind of in other parts of the country, in other industries. And so it's a little bit more of a well-rounded view of the world. And then the other piece of it that I think is really important is a lot of people come at it from a top-down kind of policy or centralized planning mentality, right? So that they're very much, hey, the Federal Reserve can do no wrong. They try to be very unopinionated when they're talking about this stuff. And generally, one of the trends that I'm a big believer in across kind of content and social audiences and all this stuff is people are going to subscribe to people, right? I want to subscribe to your personal opinion. I don't want to subscribe to you just rewriting the news in the way that 10 other publications can do it, right? It's hard for you to kind of capture my attention and make me feel like you're worth my attention versus something else. Instead, if I can basically say, look, I don't know if I'm right, but here's my opinion. Here's the work I did. Here's how I came to this conclusion. By the way, if you kind of engage with me and give me information, I'm willing to change my mind. I think people just generally appreciate that level of authenticity and kind of transparency. And I tell them all the time, look, I'm wrong all the time, but that's okay because it means I'm thinking about all this stuff, right? I'm asking questions. I'm talking to people who are way smarter than me or experts in certain niches. And so I think that people generally just look at it as like, hey, look, this guy is trying to learn. And if I just follow along with them, I'm going to learn as well, right? And ultimately, I think that there's a kind of a very, very large market for people who are just intellectually curious. And I think that tends to be, the people that gravitate towards some of the stuff that I've done.
Yeah, I used to run a nonprofit called Mission Bit where we taught coding in high schools across the Bay Area, computer science coding, after school program, summer program. One of my former students sent me something that you put out about the need for financial education in schools. I'm also on the school board in San Francisco. And it's interesting. I wrote a resolution on it and I haven't yet introduced it, but we can get into a lot, I think, about, how unprepared we send our students out into the world to really grapple with issues related to how money works. Was that something that, and I want to get into that. I want to get into public education. I want to talk a little bit about also some of the current issues in the country. I saw you wrote some stuff about defunding the police, but how did you say you majored in economics, but what was the household conversation like? Was there an emphasis on it or no?
Yeah, so I would say that my parents didn't focus so much on what you and I would consider like financial education. It was much more what I just call like the mindset, right? Of my father worked in kind of corporate America for probably 25 years of his life, something like that, and then eventually went out and started to run his own company and kind of go the entrepreneurship route. And just seeing that, right, and kind of seeing your parents take on risk and do all that, I think just generally you pick up things, at the dinner table and conversation, whatever. But also them basically saying to us like, hey, look, there's two paths in life, right? You can basically go the traditional route. And if you're good at what you do and you find the right company, you can kind of climb the corporate ladder and you can be successful that way. Or you can kind of go out on your own, right? You can build something and kind of create a path that way. I think that my brothers and I generally, I've got 5 of us total. So we kind of each have taken different paths, but some have pursued the corporate ladder path and some have pursued the entrepreneurship path. But the thing that my parents really did was they instilled personal responsibility, right? And I always say that the thing that my dad probably did that was super valuable to us was he never gave us an allowance. There was no idea of like, hey, you get whatever you want, like any of that stuff, right? I had friends that would get allowance. I remember telling my parents like, you're robbing us of our rights, right? Because when you're like a 12-year-old, 14-year-old kid, you're like, hey man, they got money and I don't. How, like, this isn't fair, right? And you're just an idiot kid. But what my dad would say is, we're in high school and stuff. If we want to go to the movies, he would do things like, hey, cool, you want $20 to go to the movies? Like go out, go rake the leaves or go do this or whatever. He did that with all my brothers. And it wasn't so much like him having to sit down in more of like an education setting and say, here, I'm going to teach you the value of money, go do this. It was more of just like, if you want something, go do something to get that money, right? And so my brothers and I had every business under the sun as kids, right? Go shovel the driveways, do all the kind of normal stuff. And when hindsight, you look back, you're like, hey, they probably did a pretty good job teaching us the key pieces of financial education without ever really sitting down and saying like, this is why you pay off your credit card debt. This is, there was none of that.
Right.
And then over time, just because we had that mindset and that curiosity, I think, we kind of learned that stuff on our own. But to your point, I think that that's like a crucial piece of what should be taught in schools, right? We're teaching kids I heard somebody say, we're teaching kids trigonometry, and you couldn't even remember, 1 second of that class. But yet we have kids who don't know how to balance a checkbook, why they should pay off their credit card debt, or just the importance of compounding interest. And it's like, are we really using our school resources, adequately? I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, right? But at the same time, it feels like we could be doing more on the financial education side to really just teach people how money works and what they can do to kind of stay ahead in today's environment.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that too. And there's also the people understanding like their impulses around spending and, and how or why is it that a lot of people, spend what they make. They spend everything they make. Like, what's sort of going on with some of the people around now. Like I read Richest Man in Babylon, which was one of those like really mindset shifting books that talked about like paying yourself first, right? A bunch of different things that were the rules of gold, as they say. And I saw you have Peter Schiff on, and you guys debated about gold, or he debates about gold or whatever. But that relates to a bit about, what I wanted to get into. You really related to how you set up what you've currently built. Because I know there's one thing to say, I know you might didn't necessarily expect to be here, but I'm under the impression now that you're here, there's a lot of intention around what you're doing. So when you think about the streams of income for yourself personally, right? Can you get into a little bit of like how many of those streams exist, and is that where you wanted it to be, or are there others that you have coming up in the year ahead?
Yeah, for sure. So let me say one other thing about I think kind of the Think and Grow Rich, Richest Man in Babylon, and Rich Dad Poor Dad. I always say those 3 books I read sequentially, all when I was 20 to 21 years old, and they were like game changers. Again, mindset, like it just completely changed the way that I thought about money and the relationship with money. And so the thing that I now show a lot of like young kids, especially in high school, I don't know if you've ever seen these 2 pictures of Jay-Z. They got a picture of Jay-Z when he's probably mid-20s. He's got all his chains on, the whole 9 yards. And they got a picture of him, now kind of in like a blazer, right? Mm-hmm. And they say on the left side, Jay-Z worth 100K. And then on the right side, they're like, Jay-Z worth, 2/3 of $1 billion or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, that's all you need to know about money. It's just the people who got none want you to think they got a ton, and the people who got a lot want you to think they got nothing, right? And I think to your point of like, just spending less than you make, literally just that alone would be a game changer for, a very large percentage of the population. And then the other piece is this conversation around multiple streams of income. Right. So I've been saying for a while now, over the last 12 weeks or so, I don't know a single person who's financially struggling right now during this economic crisis who have multiple streams of income and who spend less than they make. If you do those 2 things, you're golden, right? And you can pretty much weather any storm. And so for me, the other thing that I do is I break down kind of multiple streams of income into things that are active and passive. Right. So I know a lot of people say, hey, I only want passive income, or some people say I only want active income. But for me, I want as much diversity as possible. So I want diversity of source. Right. So things from, literally different streams of income, but also I want different types of income as well, meaning that some of it's passive. I literally don't think about it, mailbox money type stuff. And some of it is very much, I know I'm actively trading hours for dollars. Right. And so I'm kind of in control of that. And when you kind of think of it in that way of having diversity, not only in source, but also in type, you really look at it and you look at it as like a machine, and it's a super resilient machine, because at any time I could lose 1 or 2 revenue streams and be perfectly fine. Right. I'd make less money, of course, but from a resilient standpoint, you're golden. And then really once you have those streams and kind of have optimized them, then it comes down to how good of an investor are you, or a capital allocator. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that, one of the best pieces of advice I got early on, I got 2 pieces of advice, same guy. One was productize yourself. Right. So think of every action you do. What's the product? And he said, sometimes you're going to be the product. Right. So if you think of, you're an employee at a corporation, you go to work, you're the product you're providing. And your input leads to your the output that you can take away. But he goes, in other parts of your life, the product may be your ideas or your words or your actions or whatever it is. And sometimes the product that you provide is money. right? Like an investment. And so he's just like, if you learn to productize yourself, you can gain a huge advantage. A lot of people don't think that way. The second thing that he said was you basically need to get in a position where not only have you productized yourself, but also you understand how to operate like a business, right? And what he meant on that front was every business leader makes capital allocation decisions. Do I hire this person? Do I fire that person? Do I make an investment in this product line? Do I not? Do I save for a rainy day? Do I put money into a money market account? Do I leave it in my savings account? Or do I make an investment to grow the company? Whatever. Those capital allocation decisions, once you've made the income, that's actually where all the wealth comes from. So if you think of everyone from the Jeff Bezos all the way down to your local millionaire, every single one of those people is making capital allocation decisions based off the income that they derive, right? And it's actually the capital allocation decisions that are the real difference maker. And it feeds right back into like a lot of people are making capital allocation decisions that lead to consumption, right? So it's still an allocation decision. You're just not getting anything in return other than a material good. If you can instead get in the mindset of how do I take every dollar that comes in the door and put it into an allocation decision that potentially could lead to the multiplication, right? $2, $3, $4, $5 coming back. When you get in that mode, that's growth, right? I mean, that's how you grow money. And so again, I always focus more on like the mindset than the actual individual actions, because the individual actions are different for everybody. I got people who come on the podcast who literally couldn't explain to you how other people made money, but they're, rich as hell. Mm-hmm. It's just they figured out, their own path in life, but they all have the same mindset, right? I spend less than I make. I take the capital, I allocate it correctly, I multiply it, and I rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. And if you can learn that, I think that you got a good shot in life of building real kind of sustainable wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the questions I've heard you ask a few of your billionaire guests was, it's kind of like one of those, you said one of those ego things, like how did it feel when you made your first billion? I was wondering about that for you around like the amount of income sources. Like, do you say to yourself, man, when I get to 40 income sources, do you have a number, or are you just not, or it's not how many, it's just how much each one?
Look, my wife hates when I talk about this stuff because she well, listen to what she said one time. You ready? Here's what she hit me with. She was like, why do you think about money? Like at all? Not even a lot, right? Just like, why do you think about it at all? And I said to her, it's a game. Like I literally, if I lose it all, I'll make it back tenfold. Like I have no doubt in my mind, I'm gonna figure the game out. It's just how well do I play the game? And when you think of it from like a competitive kind of game oriented position, now it's fun, right? And you start to play this thing of like, if you go play pickup basketball, right? You actually don't want 5 point guards on your team, right? You want a point guard, you want a center, you want somebody who could shoot, right? You want somebody who plays defense because the other 4 guys aren't going to play defense, right? You kind of like want to build out your squad. Same thing with how you build out the revenue sources. So in basketball, you only need 5 people. You don't need 40 people to show up to the pickup game, right? Because you need 5 on the court. Mm-hmm. Same thing. You don't need 40 income sources, right? Mm-hmm. If you got 5 good ones, you're golden. Right. And so I always think about it more in terms of, can you find the right income streams that have kind of what I call depth, right? So if you said to me, hey, we can start a business tomorrow, we can make $1,000 a month, I'll tell you that's great. That's not for me, right? Because if that's the limit of what we can make per month, it's just not a good use of my time, and I would argue it's probably not a good use of your time. If instead you said to me, hey, we can build out a business, that business can start making a couple $1,000s a month, and then we can scale it, and eventually if we're top 5% in the world at doing this, we can make $100,000 a month. Oh, okay, that's interesting, right? Tell me more about what it is. How do we build it? How hard is it to actually scale? How much upfront capital do we need to invest to actually get it off the ground? Like, you start to ask questions, but that depth is there, right? That actually can scale. And so for me, it's less about like how many income sources, and it's more about almost like an efficiency equation. Mm-hmm. Can I build out enough to have diversity, yet each one can scale to the point where I think that if I only had that one, most people in the world would be ecstatic to have that one income source, right? Mm-hmm. So whatever that number ends up being, it's changed over my life, just because when you're, a single dude, you're eating at like McDonald's and, chilling on your friend's couch. You got no expenses. Everything's cool. As you get older in life, right? Things change. You got more expenses, whatever. And so I think a lot about like efficiency of revenue source. And so for me, we've got an investing business. We've got obviously all like the content media type stuff we do, and then we've got a bunch of like what I call like the passive income stuff. So whether that's real estate or higher yield kind of interest accounts, like all that type of stuff. When you look at it, it's probably I haven't counted, but like I don't know, it's less than 10 for sure, right? It's just that each one has so much scalability to it that I know I'm not going to waste a bunch of mental energy on something that doesn't have big potential.
Right, right. For the investment business, to explain a little bit what that looks like now.
Yeah, so I've got two partners. We manage right about $150 million, give or take, in that business. It's venture capital type investments. And the thought process really, if you kind of back away, so forget what the exact strategy is or, where in the capital stack we're investing or any of that stuff, it's just two key components. The first is if you look at the best performing institutions in the world, right? So this is something called the Dietrich Foundation in Pennsylvania. This is a GMO with Jeremy Grantham. This is Yale. All these kind of really large, kind of billions of dollars in asset institutions. They are overweight in private markets. So a lot of people think of, hey, I'm going to invest in public markets, but they're overweight in the private markets. And so they have sometimes, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. The Dietrich Foundation has over 80% of their assets in private equity and venture capital. So you ask, why is it that the best performers have so much in the private market? And it ultimately comes down to innovation, right? That's where a lot of the innovation occurs is in private markets. By the time a company kind of gets big enough to be in the public market, a lot of that innovation and value has already been captured by earlier investors, right? So that's kind of one thing is just, hey, if you want to get rich, do what the rich people do, right? It's not rocket science. But then the second thing is somebody who's a very well-known angel investor in Silicon Valley once said to me, he said, I think he said like 80% of his net worth in angel investing. Like, and I'm talking, kind of $5 million or less valuations, give them 25 to 100K. And I said, 80% is a big number. Why do you do that? And he said, I look at it as I've taken my money and I've hand selected the smartest, most innovative teams in the world to go work for me to grow my wealth. You look at it that way and you're like, you know what? That's a pretty good way to look at it, right? And I literally went home and I was like, damn, I should do some more angel investing, right? Because the way that he really kind of articulated that was if innovation leads to all the returns and you give money to the people who are most likely to create innovation, then if you have enough investments on the board, kind of index enough, then you should actually capture a material amount of the innovation, which leads to the value creation, right? And so I think that that's a piece that, again, if you haven't been exposed to that, if you haven't spent time and kind of heard the best in the world talk about it and their philosophy, you just don't know, right? And so I, as I've learned more and more about it, it's like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah. Well, with the media business, and I mentioned I want to get into a little bit about your process because to write something every day and to record every day is that's impressive. And so you just talk about Jay-Z. Jay-Z did an interview with the Rap Radar podcast. I don't know if you ever got a chance to catch that, but he talked about this before Kobe passed. He talked about how people get obsessed with the outcome and not the process. Like people see that Kobe scored the 60, but he was like, Kobe's probably practicing right now. And we've talked a little bit on mindset already. What does your process look like about how you approach creating content?
So I forget where I heard this Jay-Z story from. I read it somewhere, but in like, was it mid 2000s? I think is when him and Kanye did the album together.
Watch the Throne.
Yeah, and you know who it was? I think it was Ryan Leslie told me this, the producer. And I think he actually said it on the podcast. So hopefully I'm not saying anything that I'm not supposed to say. But he said that they were in Australia and Jay-Z woke up in the morning. He went and did like the Oprah show or something at like the opera house or whatever. Then him and Beyonce went out and, he took her around on the kind of like a day or whatever, came back, started recording, and they were recording all, late afternoon into the evening, late night. And at like 3 o'clock in the morning, they're still recording it. It's him. I think it was Ryan, and there was like one other person there. And all of a sudden, like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, he stood up and he ripped his headphones off. He started screaming, and he was like, "Who is going to catch me? Who else right now is working at 3 o'clock in the morning?" He said, "I'm fucking Jay-Z. Who's going to catch me if I'm still working like this?" And I think that's the mentality, right? It's Kobe, it's Jay-Z, it's all these people who are great. You never see that. Right? All you see is, like you said, you see the output. But he, in the mid 2000s, he was Jay-Z. Like, it wasn't like, he was a no-name guy, right? To still be working like that, he's just separating from the competition, right? And so I think that for me, it's just I wake up and I literally take it one day at a time. And in the military, there was this saying, whenever we had to do something. So let's say in 10 days, we're going to go, move to some other new place. We always would talk about it as 9 days and a wake up, right? Which meant, hey, man, we got 9 days. And then when we wake up, we're going, right? So it's really 10 days. But what you did is you broke down every day. So, hey, look, if we got 9 days and a wake up, let's just get through today. And then it'll be 8 days and a wake up, right? You kind of segment and compartmentalize each day. And so that's what I do still to this day, right? Is I know when I wake up every day, I got to write. The writing, when I first started, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, kind of what most people probably takes to write a blog post. Well, now more than 2 years later, I can knock it out in 45. This morning I wrote in 45 minutes. Bam, done. Right. And when I knocked it out in 45 minutes, people look at it and they're like, "Oh my God, how does he do this?" Well, it took 45 minutes. Right. So like, again, it compartmentalized, super efficient. Then we've got a daily YouTube show that we do. Right. Bam, I knocked that out. It literally takes me 20 minutes to record. So right there, you've basically got, give or take, call it an hour, hour and 10 minutes, but that's 2 pieces of content that people are like, "Oh, I couldn't even do that one of those every single day." Well, it's because they haven't really gotten the efficiency down, right? Then I'll release a podcast episode every single day. Now, I'm not doing that like record today, release today, right? So I try to be smart about it. So, going into this week, we had 2 pre-recorded. So I know Monday and Tuesday, I don't have to record for those days, but I can record, later today and tomorrow. Now I got Wednesday and Thursday done. So I'm kind of a couple of days ahead in terms of the content I have, but I'm still releasing an episode 5 days a week, right? Then what we can do is we can take that same episode, just like, we're recording here. I can publish the audio as a podcast episode. I can take the video and put it on YouTube. Right. So now all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm publishing 2 YouTube videos every single day. I'm publishing an audio podcast. I'm publishing a newsletter. When I get done writing the newsletter, I literally takes me 5 minutes or less. I read the actual, what I just wrote. Now that's a second podcast audio. And then after we get done with all of that, 2 days later, we'll go back to the podcast we released on YouTube and we'll cut it up into highlights. So in 2 days, we'll publish 2 to 3 videos. So on YouTube, it looks like we're publishing 5 videos every single day. People are like, "How are you doing this?" Well, it's because we're super compartmentalized. I probably only work to create the content 4 hours a day. Right. It's a machine. Like, we're super efficient. We know exactly what we're going to do. And then one of the principles I use is create once, publish 5 times. Well, if I can record that podcast one time and I get an audio version, I get a video version, and then I get my 3 highlights out of it, bam, I got 5 pieces of content. People are like, "Yo, this is wild." Well, yeah, I understand I got a higher capacity to work than most people, but I'm also super efficient on the back end. And we've kind of built this machine that really can kind of scale across platforms. And so it almost makes it look like we're creating more content than we actually are as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I respect that. I'm like, I'm trying to pick up some game to copy paste for myself. And I'm sure other people would be, I saw somebody put out a thread too about, some like a rundown overview of how you built some stuff over the course of time, focusing on YouTube or Twitter first, and then going to some other things.
It's focus, right? I mean, look, think about anything you've ever been good at. What'd you do? You focused, right? And you became real good at one thing. And again, I always use the basketball analogy. Like, there's a lot of kids who want to go play in the NBA, but there's not a lot of kids who don't want to shoot a basket for the first year and they just dribble. Right. And if you could learn how to be really, really good at dribbling, it's almost like you earn the right. Now you can go and learn how to do layups. And then once you become really good at doing layups, then you can shoot the mid range, right? Then you can shoot 3-pointers. And if you take that approach and you say, hey, I got a 5-year plan to become good enough to play in the NBA, yeah, there's some genetic things, right? You gotta be able to jump high enough, run fast enough, be tall, all that stuff. But if you take that 5-year plan and you focused on one part of the game at a time and you didn't move on to the next part until you were proficient and expert level at one thing, by the end of 5 years, you'd actually be pretty good. What most people do is they try to be good at everything on day one, and they end up being pretty average, at best at everything. Yeah. So I think it's just that focus when you're creating content. It's like, look, become really good at Twitter, right? Figure Twitter out, crack that, kind of code, then move on to the next one. Become really good at that, right? And then once you move on to the next platform, the old platforms, it's just muscle memory, right? You already know what to do there, right? Now it's just put the reps in. Don't worry about trying to be good at every single social media platform all at once, because you'll end up just being average at all of them.
Right. Yeah. I read, I don't know if you ever read or heard about Cam Newport's Digital Minimalism, that book.
I have not. What is that?
He wrote several books that are essentially about focus and performance. He wrote one called So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Okay.
And digital minimalism is a lot about the overuse of technology and digital addiction. And Andrew Yang wrote some stuff about this while he was running. I wrote a blog post about it before I saw that Andrew Yang put some stuff out. And this whole thing about social media and like what it gives versus what it takes, like it takes way more attention, at least in my experience, than it's given. So I always have this like adverse relationship with it. I'm like, damn, I don't want to do this shit because it's like, because I'm gonna get on there.
Yeah, here's the way I think about it, right? Is like, I'll send you the presentation I think that you're talking about. I recently did this thing with David Perel, and in it, I basically break down like, okay, here's what I built over the last 3 years. Here's, general timeline. It took 3 years, all this stuff. And then I say, tip number 1, if you want to build this, don't try it. Right. And everyone's like, ha, that's funny. And I'm like, no, I'm serious for exactly what you're talking about. Like there were days and still today, but especially in the beginning, where I would spend 5-6 hours a day responding to comments. Like, Joe Rogan, I think is the person who says, he goes, reading the comments is not good for you, whether the comments are good or bad. Because if they're good, you start to believe you're good, right? Which is a lie. And if they're bad, you start to think negatively about yourself, which is also a lie. So it's like, reading the comments every day is horrible for you. But that's what it takes to build these communities and do all this stuff. And so it's this weird thing where like I was self-aware enough of the issues to almost read the comments, but never actually internalize them, right? Or take it personally or doing that stuff. But like when you're reading, people writing on the internet like you suck 20 times a day, I'm like, man, do I suck? Right? Like you get into this weird world, and then you add in all the divisiveness and just the like the true digital addiction element of it. And there's no doubt that it is it's not good for you. And so what I tell people is like, look, if you're going to go down that path, you got to have real thick skin, and you got to be able to separate like, I'm responding to these comments, but I'm not actually internalizing the praise or the negativity. Or what you can do is, there's a lot of people who go viral on the internet because they put out something that's high quality and they never have to read the comments, right? If you kind of like that quote unquote overnight success, yeah, the comments don't matter as much. It's just that's super rare, right? I mean, how many people have ever just like overnight, built this huge, massive digital audience? Very, very rarely does that happen.
Yeah. Well, a bit about the current events before, we wrap this thing up. We see now this new interest in the tech space about investing in minority founders. And we also see a lot of rhetoric around, I brought this up earlier, defunding the police. What are some of your thoughts about first this wave around like investing and diversifying investments in founders of color?
Yeah. So in 2016, I think it was, when me and my partner, Jason Williams, started investing, we basically had a thesis where we said, look, we're going to do super early stage, like pre-seed seed investing. We're going to be agnostic to industry. We're going to be agnostic to geographic location. And we don't need to meet the founders in person, right? We were living in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time, and we just said, we're just going to do it all virtually, kind of on the phone, really out of necessity. We knew that the best founders weren't in Raleigh, North Carolina, so we're going to have to figure out, how to meet these people, whatever. Video calls weren't real. Like, a couple of years ago, like if I had said to you, hey man, let's get on like FaceTime, you'd be like, hey man, this dude's weird, right? like this dude's right. Yeah. So like now it's acceptable with Zoom and all this kind of stuff, but before it was just phone calls. And so I don't know the numbers on the race side, but I do remember probably like 2 years ago when a lot of like the Me Too stuff was happening and everything, we went and we pulled the data on female versus male founders. And what we found is we had invested in right around 60 companies, and it was like 24 or 26% of our founders were female. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so when you compare it to like the industry average of 2% or whatever, I think a lot of people were like, how the hell did you do that? And those types of numbers they would expect from a fund that had mandated female like prioritizing female founders. We didn't do that, right? We just literally do the phone, whatever. And so what it got me thinking a lot about is I think race and gender falls into this. Like you generally know I'm talking to a female on the phone, right? Like it's pretty hard to get confused as that. Race is a little bit harder in some cases, but for the most part, gender is very simple. And so what it does is that almost impersonal aspect draws more to like what somebody is saying rather than who is saying it, which I thought was an interesting thing. And also having the open-mindedness of like, I don't care where you live, right? I'm not going to be religious about you have to be in San Francisco. I have to be able to meet you in person, like all that kind of stuff. I think generally that also opened up to having, other things. The key that was really, really interesting is when we then went and looked at the performance of the fund, the females outperformed the males, right? And that's so
surprising.
It's still pretty early, right? But I think that like when we started to show LPs, like, hey, hold on a second here. Like our best founder is a female who lives in Austin, Texas, which at the time wasn't, kind of hot like it is now from a tech perspective. And if you compare her side by side to our male founders, the updates she sends, the way she thinks, just like, the way she can recruit, fundraise, all this stuff, like she's the best performer. Now, some people will make the argument like that's because she's female. Some will make the argument that it doesn't matter. I don't know. I'm not, a scientist when it comes to that stuff. All I know is that diversity in general is really good. And when you back away and you look at the numbers across, whether it's you're running an executive team, you're investing, you're building a team, right? So it's actually employee base, whatever, like having a diversity of thought is super, super advantageous for a team if they're compared to and competing against somebody who's super kind of homogeneous, right? And where you see this the most, I think tech now is kind of realizing some of the best people in the world to talk to as kind of a sounding board and an intellectual sparring partner is hedge fund managers. So I've seen recently a couple of people tweeting about this where venture capitalists are like, look, some of my favorite people to debate things with are hedge fund managers. And so everyone's like, why? Like, because they're willing to change their mind. If you present them with data, they change their mind. Most venture capitalists or people in tech, they're very kind of like, hey, I believe this, and I'm going to go bend the world to my reality. Hedge fund managers, they make a living. I have an idea or a thesis, and I've got to change my mind. Now, where does that lead to on race, right? Is the conversation I've seen in the finance community compared to the tech community is very different, right? There's a lot of conversation, I think, in finance around the data. And so what's been really interesting to me is like, I saw one guy, he wrote this huge thread, and he basically was like, look, if you go look at what you think would be the obvious data around race in the police, you would be told a story like this. I think if you pull the FBI data, what he said, and don't quote me on the exact statistics, but just directionally this was correct. He was like, for every 10,000 white people arrested, 9 are killed by the police. For every 10,000 black people that are arrested, 8 are killed by the police. And so somebody who is intellectually dishonest would stop there and basically say, hey, look, I found this thing. Racism doesn't exist. Like I found this data point, right? And they would go wave it around. They would write their, BuzzFeed-like articles with a super salacious headline. And like that would be their narrative. He goes, but if you then unpack it farther and farther and farther, and you get into things like, well, how many people are dispatched to black neighborhoods versus white neighborhoods? So over policing. If you look at things like how much military equipment is given to certain police departments compared to other police departments based on the socioeconomic kind of distribution in their jurisdiction. If you look at things like sentencing, right? Things that aren't necessarily as quantitative as just how many people got arrested, how many didn't. it paints a very, very different picture. And so then he goes, and then you overlay on top of that things like the socioeconomic status. So is it a race problem or is it a poverty problem? Well, are those two things even different at all, right? And so you start to like kind of peel back the onion more and more and more. And what you realize is at the end of the day, right, there's another guy who in the thread said, at the end of the day, most people are going to arrive at the same thing. However you kind of get there, things need to change. Right. And I think when you get to that kind of that conclusion of, OK, things need to change, that then spurs us into the conversation of what needs to change. Right. How do we actually go from there is a problem and not just complain or kind of raise the issues, right, depending on which side of the argument you're on. Instead, we got to get into an argument or a debate on, OK, how do we solve the problem? And so this is where I think that the best work I've seen is there's been a number of groups, and mostly they're civil rights groups, frankly, that are coming forward and saying things like, here are our 8 demands. We want to strip power from police unions. We want to maybe not defund the police, but what they want to do is demilitarize the police, right? Why do you have an MRAP, which is literally a military vehicle that I had in Iraq that was used to protect us from roadside bombs? Why do you need that? Right?
Right.
By the way, do they use them in terms of they're not running people over, right? They're not, putting a gun in the top and shooting people or anything, but it's the mindset of if you're rolling around with a uniform on and you've got a rifle in your hand and you're literally hanging out of an armored vehicle that's used to protect soldiers at war from roadside bombs, the mindset is you're in a combat zone, right? You're in a combative mentality. And so when you step out of that truck, you take a very different approach than maybe, let's say, somebody who is specifically going there to solve the problem rather than just show force. And so I think that the key thing that I've heard that I don't yet have an opinion on because I don't know kind of all the intricacies and I'm actively working to figure this out or better understand it is, should we decrease the funding for the police or should we actually keep funding the same or increase it, but demand that funding is used to extend the training period from, in some cases, 6 weeks to 3 months, to maybe we should train police officers for 2 years before they're allowed out to be a police officer. And so when you think of it that way, you're like, look, maybe this isn't a black and white type solution here, right? Meaning that, it's just take away their money or don't take away their money. Actually, what we need to question is kind of go deeper in the rabbit hole around what are the issues? And is it just the police or is there actually kind of legislation, right? When you get to sentencing or over policing of areas, things like that, that we can structurally actually not put human beings in a position where they can do harm. Because that to me is really interesting, right? Is how do you structure a system where individuals, whether they are racist or not, we never have to find out because we never allow them to be in a position to actually do bad things. Right? Can we structurally prevent that? I don't know. Right. And I think that's part of the conversation. And I spent a lot of time talking to people about this, which is how do you and I sitting here advocate for change in a way that can change a system, which frankly, I think a lot of people look at and say the system doesn't want to change. Right. There's a lot of people who they like the system, like they actually benefit from the system. Okay, well, if the incentive is to not change, how do you actually advocate for that change in a way that almost makes it seem like it's their idea? Right. Like it's just interesting. And look, I'm the first to say, like, I don't know the answers. Right. But I'm just trying to kind of take in as much information as I can. And I think that the people I've found the most helpful during this are the people who are willing to have kind of critical conversations and are intellectually honest about, I can find any data point you want to prove any point in the world. So it's not about one data point, right? This is a much more holistic approach, both quantitative and qualitative information that we need to have in order to actually come up with these solutions.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm sure you noticed too how these certain ideas catch a wave, and then once the wave is caught, it's like it's the only answer, right? But what's happening simultaneously around, instead of a thoughtful approach to how to reform, what's happened is this like ongoing dismissal of it actually being a problem. And so everyone's attached to defunding, right? And so like our mayor said it, Mayor of San Francisco, we have a resolution at the school board that we're going to vote on tomorrow that essentially discontinues our relationship with the police department, in a lot of cases bans them from public schools. And so this like, for people that have been like the over police community, ignored around, issues of brutality, they're just like, finally something something they can feel, right? But then it's more complicated than that, right? Because if you also live in a community that is dangerous, which is like the one that I grew up in, and you don't have the means to defend yourself, and you don't really know, it's like you either are going to do that, you're either going to defend yourself, you're going to do it with other people, like you know the
It's a blessing and a curse, right?
Right.
The police are there and they can help in certain situations, but at the same time, they can stop you just for walking down the street. And so it's kind of, what do you do? I don't know. What is the thought process? Help me understand better in terms of discontinuing the relationship with the police. Are they saying basically let's not let them in the schools in terms of like their regular policing or whatever they're doing, and they're going to be replaced by something, or is it just completely remove them? Like how does that work?
Yeah. So the focus of the resolution is on that discontinuing and then creating alternatives. And so the people, I've never gotten so many emails for any one issue. And this board gets into a lot of controversial stuff. I've gotten like close to 5,000 emails about this,
Wow. That is a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you mind me asking kind of how you think about it? And I don't know if you're allowed to say how you're going to vote yet, but like just kind of how are you thinking through the pros and cons of something like this? Because this is so complex.
Yeah, I plan to support it. But I think like my reservations are about teachers or people that work in schools that really have no idea how to grapple with what comes up at a school, and the very real issues that, the community comes into the school, and we live in a city also that has like we have a lot of issues in San Francisco, but if there is a situation where there's like domestic violence and or child abuse, and someone needs to be apprehended, or if a student has, in some rare instances, they don't feel safe, they carry a firearm. I think like traditionally the way that we have addressed some of those, it's like a case by case situation. Like some of the ways that the police have addressed it have been really egregious. In some ways have been appropriate, but that longer time horizon on who's qualified. I have this whole theory too about who gets attracted to that work, and how to keep those folks out of the position. I think the actual solutions will be more long term, but the city, as far as I can see, is a resounding like no more. No more of this sort of like intimidation. Like, I got some good friends too that are. I have one or two good friends, I shouldn't say. I should qualify, that currently are SFPD. But yeah, I plan to support it tomorrow. And as with everything, the implementation is where all of the real decisions are going to get made. So we on this board, like, we pass things, and because of the budgetary constraints or because of the personnel issues, it may take a year and a half before we actually see it materialize, right? So
yeah.
So yeah.
What you're bringing up is really interesting too. And again, I don't have answers here, right? But one of the things I've been thinking about is like, what does police mean, right? And that sounds sort of like meta, but I think you're kind of hitting at this with, you're talking about kind of ending the relationship with the police. When you say police, you're talking about guys and women who have badges and guns and cop cars and like all that kind of stuff. And then there's an alternative, right? Which almost suggests that maybe they're actually on a police force should be a spectrum of people, right? We have traffic cops who don't carry guns. Why can't we have the equivalent of a social worker that shows up to deal with somebody who's just homeless or somebody who's being nonviolent but needs help. And then, hey, you know what? If there's a guy with a gun, yeah, we should send people with guns, right? Like there's kind of this almost this spectrum. Again, I don't know exactly what the answer there is, but it feels like that conversation is starting. And then the other piece of it that I heard somebody talk about, it sounds like you're kind of hitting around this as well, is I heard somebody say that we should treat the becoming a police officer like we treat the Navy SEALs. And when you first hear that, you're like, that sounds pretty great. Like, I don't think we want anybody else who wants to combat. He goes, no, what a lot of people don't realize is most of the Navy SEALs are actually some of the most peaceful people because in the back of their head, they know, listen, if shit goes down, I'm going to kill everybody. Right? I just got the skills. But what you find is they can handle incredibly stressful situations and they never even, point their gun at anybody, right? They're just so calm because they have a command of the situation. They know that they have the best training in the world. They've put in the time and the reps to actually be proficient at their task. And so if you treat it that way, and it goes back to like, maybe we train cops for 2 years. Right. And you actually make sure that like, look, they are the best and the best at doing this job. Could you actually, by training them more, both in the combative tactics and things like that, and also then add in leadership training, social work training, that type of stuff, could you almost create this person who is better suited for the wide variety of situations they handle? I don't know, but that's an interesting thing to think about when you're talking about like at a school. We just want to teach kids, right? Like that's ultimately the goal of the school. But if, they don't sit in your seat, something as simple as like domestic abuse, I would never think of that as a problem at a school. But then I guess, if kids are showing up and they're victims of domestic abuse, teachers, staff, they've got to deal with that stuff, right? And so how do they do that? And are they the ones equipped to do it? Or do they have to look for, help from somebody else, whether it's police or somebody else? It's just, the world's complex, right?
Yeah, it is. I want to honor your time, and I told you I was only keep you to the top of the hour.
I got more time if you want to go, or we can end. It's up to you.
Okay. I kind of want to come back to this founder conversation because I want every Black founder in the country to get an investment from the homie Pomp. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah,
not everyone, but how do people get a hold of, present their products to you?
Yeah, so here's actually, I would say that the people who are most successful pitching us, the thing that they show us is they don't send us a deck and do all this kind of stuff. 9 times out of 10, they just show us the product, right? And what I mean by that is it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to even really necessarily work as much as it's just got to be like, hey, this is what I'm trying to build. Here's how far I've gotten, that type of stuff. And I think that the founders that we've seen be the most successful are the founders who, when we talk to them, it's obvious this person doesn't need us as much as we need them, right? And I think that it's a mind shift change in founders because we just lived through the greatest bull market in history, and it felt like investors, like the power pendulum was in the hand of founders. It then switched back into the hands of investors, and everyone was like, oh, I want to raise money, right? And so they all went and kind of did whatever they thought investors wanted to see. I think that power pendulum is swinging back in the favor of founders right now. And if you understand how a venture capital fund works, like I have to deploy capital on a pretty well understood timeline into companies that are then going to grow that capital so that we can give back the money plus profits to our investors. Okay, so my job is literally to go find the people who can do that. If you can show, hey, I'm building this thing that is innovative, that's going to create value, and by the way, I will give you as the investor the opportunity to invest, and I'll go grow the money for you, it's pretty compelling, right? And so I think that maybe it's Mike Maples who says this. It's looking for founders who like aren't waiting for permission to build the company. Right. If a founder comes and says, hey, I want to start my company, but I need, $500,000 to get started.
Right.
You're like, okay, so let me understand. So in 6 months, you're going to come back and say, I would keep going, but I need another $1 million. Right. Instead, what you want is you want the founder who says, hey, look, I'm building this company. Here's what I've done so far. If I have $500K, I can go 2 times faster and 4 times as far with the capital. Right. But if I don't have the capital, then like, here's what I'm going to end up doing. That kind of sense of almost momentum and just like it's gonna happen, right? I think is the best way. And then in terms of like how to get in touch, anything. I mean, email, right? It's just literally my first name, period, last name at Gmail. DM me on Twitter. I mean, we've made investments. Literally, I met a guy at lunch one time. Right. I was actually in San Francisco. Dude sat down next to me, started talking, told me what they were building. And 3 weeks later, we made an investment. So it's really, I think, we're pretty open-minded about this stuff. I know a lot of people aren't. And for us, it's been out of necessity. We don't live in San Francisco. Right. So I can't just say, hey, I'm only going to invest in people that I meet in the coffee shop. Right. Like I'm not there. Right. Yeah. And so I think that tends to be a little different. And then the other thing too is like the best way to meet investors by far is to get introduced. Like investors can say whatever they want that, hey, we invest in everybody. Like, yeah, we've done it. We can show that we've done it, but it's just human nature, right? If somebody I trust says to me, this is interesting, I know this person, they're legitimate, you should take time to look at it. You just naturally rely on your connection with that person, right? It's just like anything else, whether it's investing or just meeting new friends, you just trust the people who, you already kind of have close to you. And so spending, the extra time and effort to get warm intros, I don't think it's a necessity, but I do think that it can increase the probability that you're going to get noticed, that, people are going to take it seriously and ultimately increase the probability that you'll get an investment as well.
Mm-hmm. And what's the minimum to invest with Morgan Creek Creek Digital, correct?
Yeah. So we can't talk anything about investing, but it's not super high is all I will say. If just go to the website and people, there's a form there they can fill out, and the people with the licenses and everything can give them all the details.
Okay.
Yeah. Look. Here's actually one of the most important things. We talked about financial education earlier, and this brings us up. A lot of people will ask me, what do I think is the most messed up part of this whole system, and how do we talk about police reform, like how do we reform the financial system? And I always give them three things. The first is I think that all of the quantitative easing stuff is absolutely detrimental to the bottom 50% of Americans. Like if I don't think you could outlaw it tomorrow, right? Because you basically would be taking like a drug addict and just immediately cold turkey stopping them. Not a good thing. And you definitely don't want to do that with an economy, but being able to wean ourselves off that intelligently, I think would be very good for the long-term health of both the economy and also the bottom 50% of Americans. The second thing is the financial education. If we teach people how money works, then they're armed with the tools they need to actually thrive, right, and do the right things in order to build wealth. But then the third thing is the accreditation laws, right? I mean, the idea that like, hey, you've got to have $1 million in net worth or make $200,000 a year, and that makes you smart. And I always joke and say, like, I know a lot of really rich, stupid people. Right? Like I know a lot of them. Right. I probably know more rich, stupid people than I do rich, smart people. And it's because whether they inherited it, they got lucky, whatever it is, right? But I don't think that wealth is the best indication of intelligence. And so how can we change that, right? Again, we're not going to go cold turkey and just say, hey, anyone can do anything from a wealth perspective, because you do want to protect investors, yada, yada, whatever. Could we have like an SAT-like test where, look, if you get yourself educated and you can come in and you can pass this written test, then you're accredited, and now you can invest in whatever you want. Hey, make it about education, right? Like that is the signal for intelligence, not how much money is in your bank account or how much money your employer pays you. And so I think that there's a lot of work that we can do there. It sounds like the SEC and some others like recognize, hey, we probably should make some changes. I don't know if they yet have like a direction as to what the solution is, but I do think that will be a game changer for, again, 50% of the population. I think it's 45% of Americans don't own a stock. Right. You don't even need to be accredited to do that. So like, hey, how do we educate people so they know, don't hold cash, invest, right? Multiply your money. Then you look at, I think it's, 45 or 50% of Americans don't have $400 for an emergency payment without selling anything. Hey, how do we fix that? Right. Like this is super basic stuff, but again, if you're just not exposed to it, right. And I'm sure with your time with the school board, like you just see kids who they basically are, they understand the environment they grew up in, right? And so I always say, if you take a kid from, Connecticut who grew up in a super rich white area, and you take a kid from the south side of Chicago, and you take a kid from, the suburbs of LA, and you put them all in a room, they will have some commonalities. They may listen to the same music. They may, like the same sports teams, whatever. But when you then go into things like business or finance or, education, night and day difference. Why?
Yeah.
They're a product of their environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the internet changes that. Like today, now that kid in Southside Chicago can get the same exact education. And if he's intellectually curious, actually a better education through YouTube than the kid in Connecticut can get from his local high school, right? And so I think that that's part of the game here. There's just a lot of work to be done, right? So it's easy to, for you and I talk about the problems. It's just how do we solve the problem, right? How do we push the issues forward? Sounds like you guys are doing a great job with that. And other school boards around the country, that's part of the challenge.
Yeah, looks like you'll be running for mayor.
Nah, listen, man. You don't want me in politics. I like my life. Those 5,000 emails you got, that's a reminder. I'm never doing that.
Oh, the way you get through efficiency stuff, you probably responded to them by now. All right, let me do like a few quick things before I'll let you go.
All right, let's do it.
Who wins presidency?
I think Trump wins by a landslide, not because he's a good president or because he's intelligent, but because he understands the world we live in. And he realizes that, unfortunately, in today's day and age, facts don't matter. And whoever dominates the headlines gets the votes. And he's willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do. And the best example I give my friends is you're telling me Joe Biden and Trump in a meme war, who's willing to go further? Trump, right? And so it's just like, again, we could discuss all the structural issues of how we got here. That's just the world we live in, unfortunately. And so I don't even think it's close. I'll give you a little hot take though. Mm-hmm. Somebody else said this to me. I didn't believe him at the time. I'm becoming more convinced Joe Biden's not the person who runs against Trump. Okay. And they were making the argument that there will either be somebody who takes the VP seat, and then at the last second, there's a switch, and they end up being the presidential ticket, and Joe Biden's the VP. Or this person, he's a professor at Cornell. His thing was Andrew Cuomo will be swapped out for Biden. I don't know. I was at 0% believability. I'm at like 3% now. Right? So still don't believe it, but yeah. but I'm becoming more convinced.
Yeah, I'm at 0% on that one too. Okay. Worst moment in business?
My worst moment?
Yeah.
I worked at Snapchat for 17 days and got fired. And probably the single best moment at the same time. Mm. Right? So it's one of these things where like, and I could say that actually about some of like what most people would consider my best moments. Mm-hmm. Right? Where it's like, did a huge deal or whatever. And you look back and you're like, it was so great, yet still there was negative side effects to it, mm-hmm. right? Whether it's, your ego gets inflated, you think that it was skill and actually there was a little bit of luck involved, whatever it is. So I always try to think through like the worst moments also have best pieces to it. And the best moments also have, bad side effects as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. The last and final question.
All right.
Top 5 rappers.
Oh man, do you know who Darius Dale is?
No.
All right, so he's a partner at the firm, but he's basically an economic analyst or a Wall Street analyst. He came on a podcast, and his question that he asked people in interviews is, "Who's your rap Mount Rushmore?" So same question. He just calls it the Mount Rushmore. Okay. And so I forget exactly who I said on it, but if I had to do off the top of my head right now, Biggie, Tupac for sure. You got to throw Lil Wayne in, Jay-Z, and Eminem.
That's a respectable list. You got to respect that list. It's hard to argue.
I think that's how I go. Who did I say? I said Biggie, Tupac, Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, and Eminem. Okay. Yeah. Who's on yours? Who's your top 5?
I like to throw in some like random people just to kind of like upset folks. But I would say, this who I mostly listen to now is Nipsey Hussle.
Okay.
But if I had to say like who are like the greatest rappers, I would definitely say Biggie, Jay. I love Kanye. I can't. That's gonna get me in trouble. But his more recent stuff, not so much, but I keep coming back to Kanye. And you know, for the motivation to get up and get it, like Jeezy is like,
yeah, absolutely.
Like that, you know.
Do you remember the first rap song like you can remember as a kid?
The first rock song I memorized was Coolio's "Gangsta's Paradise." That was the first one I memorized, and I was like in the 5th grade. The first one I probably remember is like E40, like "Sprinkle Me." I don't know if you know that song.
So you're a couple of years older than me, probably. The first one I memorized, this is pretty funny, was Nelly's Country Grammar, and
Wow.
we were running around singing that all day long.
Yeah, I remember that one. That
was the summer jam for like months. And I always ask that because it's one of these things where like I think the first couple of rappers or rap songs that you like and you memorize the lyrics to, like that sets you on your trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. So like, you know, Gangsta's Paradise, that's pretty hard to compete with. But now I've talked to people and they say some crazy, I'm like, no wonder your music taste sucks, right? Like that was the first song you listened to.
Mr. Pump, you know, he's like, he has a huge platform. He's putting out great information. I think it's apump.com, or is it pump.com? My bad.
The website is just anthonypompliano.com, but Twitter's the best thing. Pompliano on Twitter.
Okay.
My guy in Texas, man, he's got @Pomp. He's trying to sell it to me. I told him I ain't buying it, man. He's a radio DJ. I'm gonna get people. Every podcast I go on, I'm gonna start telling people, tweet at that dude and tell him stop being a punk and just give him the damn.
You know who the real pump is. Stop.
He blocked me because people tag him all the time by accident, right? Rather than me, and so he blocked me as if that was going to change the fact that people are tagging him. I was like, look, man, come on. So he says he's getting off social media. Do I want to buy the handles? I was like, no, man, just give them to me. You don't need them anymore.
Thank you for the time, brother. I appreciate you.